$40 trillion. The U.S. national debt crossed that line this week, and if your reaction was shock, that's the part worth examining, not the number itself. This was never a surprise. It was scheduled. $38 trillion in October, $39 in March, $40 now. 5-month intervals, almost metronomic, because most of what drives that number isn't a decision anyone made this year. It's demographic math set in motion decades ago, running on autopilot. Call it the country's midlife milestone, the one you saw coming and pretended not to. This isn't a countdown clock telling you to panic, it's the actual mechanism, the difference between a government under pressure and one that's actually finished. Most countries carrying debt like this are the first. A shrinking few are drifting toward the second. By the end, you'll know how to tell them apart yourself. Start with the mechanism, because the government overspends explains nothing. A large and growing share of federal spending in the U.S. and most large developed economies isn't voted on annually. It's formula-driven. Social Security, Medicare, pensions tied to population age structure and set decades in advance. As the population ages, that spending rises on schedule, independent of any administration. That's the autopilot, why this milestone was forecastable years out, and why just cut spending is harder than a headline. And this isn't a uniquely American story. The U.S. is the loudest example simply because it's the largest, but the same structural math applies to Japan, the U.K., France, and Italy, all shaped by the same demographic clock. In the U.S., interest payments crossed defense spending for the first time in the nation's history in fiscal year 2024, narrowly, at roughly 1.06 times. In the UK, that ratio is closer to 1.8 times. In Japan, roughly 1.5 times. In France, the exact multiple depends on how you classify defense spending, but by every major measure, interest has now overtaken it there too. This isn't a U.S. anomaly. It's the same arithmetic, playing out at different speeds. One myth worth killing: that a government can simply raise taxes and close a gap this size. The historical record doesn't support it. Tax increases large enough to offset structural deficits like this are rare, and where tried, have typically closed only a fraction of the gap. Revenue increases have often preceded further deficit growth. Revenue alone hasn't been how large economies actually resolve debt loads like this. This is the distinction that actually matters. A hard default is what most people picture. A government stops paying, or a currency collapses into hyperinflation. Rare among large currency-issuing economies, overwhelmingly a smaller economy external debt phenomenon. Argentina, 9 times. Not the US, not Japan, not the UK. A soft default is quieter, and it's the one large economies actually use. The government keeps paying in full in its own currency, but that currency is worth progressively less. Inflation erodes the debt's real value without anyone missing a payment. No headline event, just a currency that buys less than it used to. Here's the mechanical reason. A meaningful share of what gets financed each year isn't new spending. It's rolling over debt that's already maturing, sold again as new bonds. By Treasury's own numbers, 83% of this year's $11 trillion in gross issuance goes toward refinancing debt that's already maturing, not funding anything new. When that much of the machine is just rolling debt forward, a government has every incentive to let inflation quietly erode that debt's value rather than force a visible fight over spending or taxes. It's also why some investors have spent the last decade moving savings into assets a government can't quietly inflate away. Hard assets, alternative currencies. Not a recommendation from this channel, a documented pattern worth understanding. What it means for your own situation is yours to decide. So here's the actual skill to leave with. Not a verdict on the US, but a way to check any country yourself. Watch 3 things in order of importance. 1. The rollover share. What percentage of new debt sold is refinancing versus net new borrowing? High and rising means dependence on continuous market access, not fiscal discipline. 2. Who's buying? When domestic and foreign buyers pull back and a central bank has to step in and absorb auctions itself, the mechanism behind what's sometimes called a failed or no-bid auction. That's rare and consequential enough it deserves its own breakdown. A country case study on Canada's 1994 near miss, coming soon. 3. The interest-to-revenue ratio. Not interest versus GDP, interest versus what the government actually collects. That's what tells you how much room is left before spending choices become forced rather than chosen. None of this is proprietary or hidden. Don't take my read on it, check the numbers yourself. We do our best to track these live at BankruptBaby.org. 40 trillion was never the story. Track the rollover share, the buyer composition, and the interest-to-revenue ratio instead, and you'll see the real signal months before the next round number makes headlines. Turning 40 doesn't end anything. It's just the point where you stop pretending the math wasn't always there and start paying attention to the numbers that actually predict what comes next. The milestone was never the question. Tracking what happens after it is. If you want the fundamentals underneath everything in this video, what a bond auction actually is, how inflation and government debt are connected, that's the explainer to watch next. And if you want to see what actually happens when a country can't sell its own debt to its own citizens, stay subscribed. Canada's 1994 near miss is coming.